Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos I'm doing on the design of weapons for video games. And in this one, I am particularly looking at the idea of weapon sets, which is how to think about weapons not just in individual weapons in isolation, but how they work together as a game thing. Most of this is kind of unspecific, and it's general advice about what you might want to think about when you're designing weapon sets. And I'm hoping to keep it quite short because some of the videos in this particular series have crept up a little bit in length, and I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to have, I think, 7 points that I'm going to quickly blast through. So the first is don't forget that when you're designing, you really should be centered on the player. I think weapons is an area where it's really easy to get carried away and think about having more and more weapons and all the sorts of things that you might want to have. But you need to bear in mind what the player expects and what the player might find is fun in the game. And don't get too distracted potentially by thinking, well, I'm doing an accurate historical medieval game. I'm going to have every single type of sword and other melee weapon that was available. And that might be appropriate if you're doing an RPG, but if you're doing a shallower game, then that many weapons might just be too much, might be too confusing. Tailor it towards the game, but also, of course, tailor it towards what the player is going to experience. And we're going to explore some of those things through this video. So the most obvious thing here is tactical variety. So, of course, different weapons lead you into different tactics. Fairly obviously, we're going to break this down with some examples. Melee weapons mean you're up close and personal. Close range projectile weapons, shotguns are particularly good in closed quarters and at close range. Rapid fire guns can also be good when you're surrounded by lots of enemies, so something like a portable chain gun. And of course, game heroes are very, very strong, so can carry things that other people wouldn't be able to carry. Sniping, being able to shoot accurately from a distance, so sniper rifles are obviously a thing for that. And then something potentially that will create an area of effect. So these are obviously particularly useful against when you have a larger number of enemies who are less powerful and hopefully at a distance from you, because one common thing with explosive shells and things like that is that they can damage the player as well. So actually that's quite a good thing to build into your game. Otherwise you'll be firing shells at your feet and destroying everything around you, and if you can't have an effect on the player, then it becomes too easy potentially. So the third thing I want to dive into is potentially the cost of use for the player. This is of using a weapon, and there is always a cost, whatever weapon, but there may not be a huge amount of cost depending on the weapon. So time is the obvious one, where there always should be some measure of time. You're using up time by using a weapon, so other weapons might do less damage, but are faster to use, and therefore the damage over time. I've discussed that in terms of weapon design before. Accuracy, I'm not sure if it's really cost, but it's certainly an aspect of use. Ammo, of course, and in the next video after this one, I want to talk very briefly, about the concept of ammo management. And self-damage, so I just mentioned explosive things that might damage the player as well. So that is a potential cost of using a rocket launcher in close quarters, for example. And then I guess I don't think it really comes necessarily in the cost of use, but a lot of games provide some kind of basic weapon that is always available, that you can't get rid of and never runs out of ammo. So something like a basic pistol, so that no matter how badly the player is doing, they always have a usable weapon. So number 4 in my list is making them appropriate to the game, and this is just so obvious that I really don't need to say very much about it. Pirate games, you're going to want cutlasses. Um, yeah, uh, humorous games, you're going to want some silly weapons that do strange things. Accurate battle simulators for um, the Trojan Wars, you're going to want to uh, go and research what the actual weapons were and how they were used and things like that. So making them appropriate to the context. Power. So this one is, as I mentioned before, weapons are a particularly good way of having the player feel that they have power and giving them this kind of power rush and dominance. And that's can be achieved in several ways with weapons. So there's the obvious thing of how much damage they actually do to the enemy, but also there's the thought of uh, a weapon that from real life that they're aware of and being able to get hold of that and use it. That's potentially gives a feeling of power. So, a legendary sword or an iconic gun or something like that, your AK-47 possibly. And then the third aspect is the actual visual aspects, and you might have a fantasy gun and call it something silly like the BFG, but then if you make it big and powerful looking, then that also enhances that feeling of power for your player. Number 6 is advancements. So don't necessarily give your player all the weapons right at the start of the game, because this is, along with all sorts of other unlocks and things, one way of emphasizing this feeling of advancing through and progressing through your game. And with that in mind, I want to actually briefly also mention balance. I don't want to spend any time at all really on this idea of balance, but if you're having some kind of RPG game, and you've got different classes that are allowed different weapons, and then you've got multiplayer PvP, you need to be thinking about the balance in that situation. Okay, and so the final thing I'm going to do is a very quick example basic set. This is it's some kind of first-person shooter that I'm thinking of. There's not a lot in here really, and to some extent, this is partly based on Doom. But this basic set here is you've got a chainsaw, so you've got a melee weapon. You've got a flamethrower, so that's a kind of a close quarters weapon, which potentially has other effects because you've got fire. So if you've got explosive barrels, you can make those explode as well. Shotgun for close quarters, fully automatic pistols. So the kind of thing you can have one in each hand and rapid fire as you shoot around. And in my head, I've got the kind of shooting scene from The Matrix of people diving around and using these kind of weapons. A sniper rifle, so you can shoot them from a distance, and a rocket launcher, and we talked about having things that get explosives. So this is a very basic set, but it actually covers quite a lot of ground in terms of different tactics and tactical choice for the player. So there's, it's a reasonable starting point for thinking. So that was relatively quick. Thankfully, it was what I tried to achieve. So I'm going to say my traditional farewell, which is that's it from me for now.